Welcome to Leaders in the Arena. My name is Dr. John Plating. I'm a retired Air Force colonel, and I'm also an executive in residence with Bridge Innovate. For over 20 years, Bridge Innovate has empowered leaders to think, lead, and problem solve differently for sustainable results. And then this series of on this particular podcast is designed to share valuable insights and lessons from our clients and network as inspiration for leaders in the arena, championing organizational growth and social good. And I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm thrilled to host my fellow Air Force leader, Colonel Pat Rayner. Pat and I actually served together way back years ago, but Pat is currently working at the Pentagon as an Air Force colonel. And Pat, let me just go ahead and let you introduce yourself before I say any more.
Okay, well, thanks, John. And looking forward to our discussion today. I think it's going to be fun. But yeah, Pat Rayner, originally from Mississippi, South Mississippi, and been in the Air Force for 24 years now. It's amazing even to say that out loud. During my career, been a pilot, taught history at the Air Force Academy. That's where my paths crossed with John and Paula, his wife. I've also been an executive officer, an ops officer, a two-time commander, a NATO officer, and now currently a congressional liaison, trying to figure out what that means every day. I've been married almost 20 years, got two kiddos, a 16-year-old girl, a 13-year-old boy. And John, you mentioned, I think we first met in 2010 in Colorado Springs, but my wife Gibson and I have always considered John and Paula to be mentors of ours, and definitely we've learned a lot from them over the last few years and value their friendship highly. But like I said, fun to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Outstanding. Yeah, we have. I don't think there's any shortage of stuff that we could talk about. We'll try to keep ourselves on script here because we have a limited amount of time, and really hope to have this be valuable for our listeners and our viewers. Today, we're exploring the foundations of leadership philosophies, and specifically how defining a set of principles can shape a leader's approach and impact. So actually, like going through the process of thinking about and defining those things. Many leaders, of course, they start with a rough idea of where they want to stand on things, but over time, they bump up against challenges that sharpen these particular values into a real distinct philosophy. And so I know for Pat, as you've shared with me, you've talked about a number of things, but if you could sort of hit upon what are the things that you find is being foundational to your leadership philosophy today, where you currently stand, and why did you choose those things, I guess, too?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like in the military, I've been put in leadership positions before, been put in charge of groups of people, airmen in the Air Force, and asked to lead them. And then afterwards, sometimes you don't, you move on to the next job. And I think there's been a few times in my career where I have been forced to reflect. And when I have those opportunities to reflect, and I say forced because I think they just appeared. People would ask me questions about how did you lead here? And I'd say, it's a great question. Let me think about it some more. But over the course of my career, during these times, a few things started to materialize that I value. And really, when I think about my leadership philosophy, I think about what type of environment do I want to foster when I'm in charge, when I'm the commander or the leader, what I want that environment to be all about. And, I'll say that this is what's worked for me. And actually, there's a great book by Colin Powell about his military service called What Works for Me. I think that's the title of it. But these three principles, action, professionalism, and resiliency, are the three things that when I looked back at my career, that's what I value. That's the type of environment that I want to foster.
Can you, thank you for that. So those action, professionalism, and resiliency, you mentioned briefly about sort of the context behind what what forced you to write those things down. Would you? I know for a lot of leaders, you might have something that you've settled upon, but for you to actually go through the process of not just thinking about those things, but really writing them down and spelling those things out, how's that been? How have you found that to be either helpful or edifying or strengthening, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's really going to tie back to that center one of professionalism. I think the process itself is in some ways most beneficial for the leader. Like I said at the beginning, in the military career, you can be given an assignment, you do this job, you move on to the next one, and not much time to think about what you're really about, what do you value, and definitely think that the my time or my career, there's been certain situations where these just have resonated with me. For example, so I was C-17 pilot by trade. I did that for a while. I taught at the Air Force Academy, and then I went to this unit called Contingency Response. And when I got to this unit, it was a many different specialists all put together in these small mobile elite teams. And our mission there was to go into an airfield and to build up the mobility machine for the Air Force. So that's to deliver personnel, equipment, supplies, ammunition, weapons, you name it. We wanted to build the airfield that it was able to do those operations. And I was put in charge. And so I was put in charge, and there'd be a maintainer, there'd be an airfield operator, there'd be a communication specialist, there was security forces, there was intelligence, there was supply, there was power production, all of these different things. And I don't know those. I'm not the expert in those fields. So I knew then that I needed to surround myself and I needed to create that environment of action, one that people went out and executed their mission with little direction from me, because then the reality, I could not give them the direct instructions on what they needed to do. So that is something that has just stuck with me, fostering that environment where people that work for you feel confident to go out and do their job. And I talked about forced reflection after my first command. I read a book by Jim Mattis, former Secretary of Defense, called Call Sign Chaos. And he talked in there that he wanted to create leaders with a bias towards action. And so that is something, when I read that, I think that word is like, that's exactly what I've been trying to do but I was able to write it down as action. And that's the first one, because for the line of, for the business that we're in the military, when you're doing a mission, if you have to look over your shoulder every 5 seconds and get further direction, then you're losing time, you're losing the initiative. And so that's why action was the first one. And I can keep going, John. If you
I just want to jump in real quick, and
Yeah.
I just am curious because the way you sort of alluded to the fact that one of the reasons why people might not take action is because they're looking for more direction. But I think you and I both know that's not the only reason why people don't know what the next thing is to do. I'm just curious. I want to kind of like, what are some of the things that you think handcuff people or make people think that they can't take action? Like, what would be, are those, do you have any observations along those lines? Because again, I suspect that sometimes it's not that your people didn't know what to do, but, or that it's not that someone would not know what to do, but that there might be other factors that would be preventing them from sort of taking that next step. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I definitely think if you roll in, let's just take, my experience in the contingency response. If you roll in with the idea that you do know everything, and that you are the smartest person, you can develop in, the people that are put under you, this fear of stepping forward without a definite approval from their commander or from their leader. This is going to tie back to the last principle of resiliency, but you've also, you've got to be, as a leader, if you're going to espouse action, then you have to be okay with failure. because failure is going to happen. You have to be okay with taking risk. So if you are a risk adverse leader, it is going to be very hard for you to say you want to foster an environment of action or bias towards action. So you have to be willing to let mistakes happen. And what I've learned throughout my career is it is so easy to say, I take risk as a leader. I'm okay with failure as a leader. And then you have someone on your team fail. And then your first thought in your head is, well, I'm never going to let them do that again. I'm just going to do it myself. And hey, you can't do that at all. So I think that environment for action, you're empowering the people that work for you. You're getting their back when they fail, and then you're helping them back on their feet through that as well. But it is, you also have to humble yourself to understand that you are not the one that's going to be providing the step-by-step instruction of what they're doing. Does that get at it?
Yeah, I think that's really good.
Okay.
As we kind of go through this too, if you have any actual specific examples or stories of things that sort of pop to mind of, somewhere where you gave somebody the latitude to do something and it went sideways and you had to kind of answer the mail for it, even though it wasn't really your fault, but you again wanted to foster this culture of action, and that it in the short term it kind of bit you in the rear, but in the long term it would sort of yield better dividends. Anyway, I just throw that out, so don't hesitate to kind of share those things. But yeah, I can imagine, yeah, exactly, where you're in a situation, you say one thing, well, the boss says one thing, but next, I didn't do things properly, and he's bit my head off. And I know I've had situations where that's happened, and it's certainly you shut everything down pretty rapidly when you take that approach. So okay, professionalism. Would it be better for you action, professionalism, and resiliency? Just as a recap for our listeners, do you want to cover professionalism next, or do you want to cover resiliency and come back to it? Because I know you kind of referred to professionalism as sort of being in the center, like the sweet part of the Oreo. So
Yeah, and I think, professionalism is something that over the course of my career I've learned. I think at the beginning, being a professional for me was being the best C-17 pilot I could be, taking it seriously, upgrading to every position that I could, studying hard, being the best pilot, being the best air crew member. And then as I progressed, and really at the Air Force Academy when teaching history, and I can just remember teaching to the cadets and showing them things that I did in the C-17, and they would ask some hard questions on, well, why'd you decide to come here? Why'd you stay in the Air Force? What do you want to do in the Air Force? And forced reflection once again by these young eager cadets was helped me ask those questions to myself. What do I do here? What do I want to be here? And it really started to build up in a sense of professionalism. And I think what's carried me on is, what does a professional do? A professional wants to be the best at what they do. A professional studies. A professional trains hard, practices. A professional gets feedback. But then other things that a professional does is it celebrates their heritage. It celebrates accomplishments. And I think that's about, when I go back to the environment that I want to foster as a leader, is one where we understand our heritage. We understand where we came from, who are the people that laid the foundation for what we're doing today. And then when we have success, we celebrate that. And I definitely have tried to model that, especially when I was my two commands. But I think that's what it is for professionals. And I love, there's been times in my last job where I would meet with younger officers, and my questions to them would also be like, hey, what are you reading? What are you listening to? And what are you watching? Those three things. What are you reading, watching, and listening to? And to go around the room and hear, because there's a lot of ways that can make you better there's a lot of different ways to make you better as your job in the Air Force as a leader. I was always curious to how they were doing that. And then I would come back and say, you should be thinking about these things in terms of getting better at what you can do. And one thing I forgot to mention with action, and this happens with professionalism, this is in part with professionalism as well. This is team. So, the action is not about, it can be, how do I make myself better, right? How to become a lead at my craft, like I said about professionalism. But you really need to be thinking to these in the team concept, especially in the military. How do I make the team better? How do I make the team more lethal? How do I make them more agile? How do I celebrate the team? How do I protect the team? Another thing a professional does is protect their profession. They defend it to others. So
Mm.
that's professionalism.
Are there some things that you found along the way that have been really helpful in sort of fostering, we use the phrase team building, but things that have been really essential to helping your units have a greater sense of sort of their own internal cohesion with each other, things that you've
Definitely.
tried to do. And I know these aren't necessarily just, I'm talking to you, Pat, but I know your wife Gibson is a big part of what you've done in the past. And have there been ways that you have kind of brought her in, and how has she been a part of that as well?
Yeah, so I'll start with part that doesn't include her because it's shared suffering. I think I'm not going to say that with my wife, but it, doing hard things together as a team, that builds bonds. Um, and sometimes doing hard things for the reason that they're hard, and doing those creates bonds um, among a team. And then the other thing, you mentioned Gibson. I think what I've had in my experience, I've brought her alongside me, or she's brought me alongside her, maybe, when we interact with families of the people that we've led. And presence is important. It's not necessarily what she said when she met with families. It's not necessarily um, having having anything to give them, but being there, I think, set a tone of, oh, this is a place that my family can feel comfortable as well. And so I think that has definitely been a benefit throughout my career.
Yeah, good, good. Well, the last of your three points is resiliency, and I'd love to hear you expound on that.
Yeah, resiliency, it's really the idea of what happens when you fail. How do you bounce back? Resiliency is not how do you avoid failure, or how do you make things hurt less, because you're going to face setbacks, failures in your career. I mean, I've done that. I have tried to get positions, promotions, jobs, upgrades that I did not get, and those hurt and those stung. But how do you bounce back? How do you recover from it? I used to stand up in front of all airmen and I would say, you need to have a strong family life to be resilient. And I remember, some kind of rumblings in the back, where some airmen would be like, I joined the Air Force to get away from my family. And it made me realize, that's not the only place that where we become resilient. And the so I think it's something, how do you identify yourself? So for me, as I progress in the military, I'm not just Pat the C-17 pilot, or Pat the commander, or Pat the NATO officer. Who am I really, and how am I defined? And there's different layers of where I find meaning in life. It's not just about being an Air Force officer. If it was just about being an Air Force officer, man, that would be very difficult to recover from failures that have happened throughout my career. Um, and I also think that when we talk about failure, people immediately think, oh gosh, that means like people died, or the failure, you crash an airplane. And those are big failures that are tough to recover from. But I'm really talking about those day-to-day disappointing things that you go through, whether that's poor feedback from your superior, whether that's poor feedback from a peer. Um,
Mm.
those little things add up, and are you resilient? I had my last command. I had a squadron commander. I'm kind of stealing this from him, but he talked about investing and banking resiliency. So when we would talk, hey, you go, you do hard things, you train hard, you do the mission. When we give you time off, we wanted to let the airmen know they needed to be spending time investing in things that make them resilient. Because it's not just enough to say I had downtime from my main job or my main training. Like, what did you do to invest in yourself in order that you can recover from disappointments that you're going to go through? And so that is, that's resiliency. And to wrap it all these three together, these are big. These are not, pinpointed. What I'm saying is you can nest a lot under these three principles: in action, professionalism, resiliency. And I use these no matter what the job is. So contingency response group commander, we had a job of deploying into combat areas, setting up air bases, some highly stressful jobs. I would talk about action, professionalism, resiliency. My new job is a congressional liaison for the Air Force. And I talk about action, professionalism, and resiliency. So no matter what the job is now and whatever's next for me, these are the things that I value. And these are the things that as a leader, I want to foster because they're important to me.
That's good. Yeah, as you talk, I don't. So just for our listeners, of course, you've heard what Pat's doing. I work at a small liberal arts college here on Lookout Mountain, Georgia, and one of the things I do is we help students make the transition from being students to being going out into the work world. And so we have these different events that we host. We call them professional development brunches. Basically, these events we put together where we have a range of topics that we cover, and where we really hit upon some of these things that students should be thinking about and doing as they prepare to move out into the work world. And we call them our buffalo brunches. And the reason why we've adopted this image of the buffalo, because and this is a thing we talk about out west, the American buffalo, one of the things that's unique about it is when these storms come up on the horizon, because the storms often travel from west to east. One of the things that buffalo know how to do is instinctively, when the storm's coming, they don't run away from the storm, but they actually run into the storm, because by running into the storm, they know they spend the least amount of time in that storm. And so just really resiliency, I think, is such a part of whether it's sort of taking your lumps because, you made a bad call, but you need to kind of suck it up and go on and learn from it and move on, or being able to endure difficult situations during a deployment or things like that. That's all sort of part and parcel. So it's interesting that as you work with people who were not much older than the people I work with, sort of hitting upon these similar themes. I'm wondering, Pat, I'd love to hear, I know these are really wonderful talking points, but if you have any specific stories about, or a story or stories that talk about, maybe during deployments or things like that, things that came up that kind of reinforce these 3 points.
Yeah, I think there was a deployment of mine as a contingency response commander thrown into, really austere environment and, trying to understand what our role was there. And I remember it was sitting
Are you able
around.
to say where it was? Are you able to say where
Yeah,
it was
it
or
was
whatever it's
Syria.
called?
So yeah,
Okay.
dirt strip in Syria. And I remember this wasn't, I did not have these terms, and I didn't like tell the team, hey, action, professionalism, resiliency. It's actually funny. I had 3 different terms just for our mission. It was accountability, safety, and it was accountability, security, and safety, which that doesn't make a great acronym for when you're talking to your folks, but those are the 3 things I talked about the most there, because it was a different environment. But I remember one morning I'm waking up and I'm like looking at my notebook on, okay, as a leader, I don't know if you all do this, but sometimes be like, okay, you're the leader. What are you going to say today? What are you going to do? Um, Little trepidation there. So I'm writing down, like, I need to tell this, need to make sure I do this, need to make sure I tell so-and-so this. They need to be getting after this. They need to consider this. And I walk outside and I see like some tents going up in a corner over here. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, well, that's your guys. They're putting a tent over there because you need to have a command and control post, and it needs to be away from the airfield in this direction. And I remember like looking down at my list and being like, check, 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 check. Like I didn't say anything, and they were already going after it because they really knew it better than I did. And
Mhm.
thankfully, they felt empowered to make decisions and to take action like that without waiting for my direction. Um, so that was definitely, I think the rest of my experience in deployment was conflict resolution every single day with the different joint partners that were participating with us in that important mission against ISIS. But yeah, that's one that comes to mind. Um, on the professionalism side, I would say that just treating this service, and I think treating anything I do as a professional, involves working with your peers. And I have found just such joy in my military career of working with peers. And I think, getting feedback and gaining perspective from my peers has been amazing. And then on resiliency, I guess the reason I used to tell airmen you need to have a strong family to be resilient is because I have had a strong family, and that's been a great source of my resiliency. And there's been time in my career that I've been disappointed with how things turned out for me. And to be able to come home and understand that, hey, it's not all that I am, and has been, definitely helped me be successful or get back up. So I think those are the main things. I had never written down before what my leadership principles were. So this process for me, because it came from a peer, he was taking another command. He said, "Hey, I'm writing up what I'm about so that I can hand this to my, secondary leaders under me, and they can understand the kind of environment, what I'm all about." And I just loved it. I thought that idea was incredible. I'd already had some things I was working on. Basically, how you want to tell your unit, this is who I am. And so for transparency, I said, this is what I'm about. And this is the kind of environment that I want to foster. And it was received well, to the point that they wanted me to send it out to every airman so that every airman could see this. And then I hit on this over and over and over again. Every time that I addressed, and this was a group of about 570 people. And so quarterly, I would have 10 to 15 minutes in front of them, and I would always hit on one of these principles. Because like I said, they're big enough that you can nest a lot of stuff underneath them. But I would go back to it over and over again. And the hopes were that this would resonate. Um, and so I stuck to that message over and over again. Um, it Yeah, hopefully that.
My hunch is that, especially just, and for those of you who are not familiar kind of with how things, sort of organizational structures in the military, a group commander, you are in a senior leadership position where you're not rubbing shoulders with the people that you're leading. You're really rubbing shoulders with the people who are, I mean, you're a couple tiers up, right?
They're
And
leading
so
leaders.
exactly right. And so I think for you to provide that kind of vision to them, or at least, in some ways, you are enabling and you're empowering your squadron commanders who can take your message and really make it their own, and then try to breathe that, or uh, help manifest that, I guess, in the larger organization. That's a really important thing. So that's been, well, hey, I am amazed. I'm looking at the clock here, and I think we are out of time. Are there any questions? I don't know that we have time to cover any. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. We don't have any questions today. Well, hey, are there any last words that you'd like to have for our audience, Pat?
I think the one thing we never didn't talk about is, leadership changing over time. I think that was like in the
I
title,
think we
maybe.
actually billed this episode as that, and we never got to that. So,
But
anyway,
like I said, these principles are really big, and the way that I have been nested underneath them, I think how it changes over time is, uh, who knows after more experiences if I'll add something else to this, and I'll be totally fine with that. I'm not married to these forever, but this is, like I said at the beginning, this is what's worked for me. And I think it encapsulates my experience in leadership positions in 24 years in the military.
I really appreciate that. It's been a delight. I know for Paul and I just to be connected with you guys over the years, and just to and for me to us to sort of watch your career and how where you are today, and it's really been an exciting thing. So. Just for our audience out there, I want to first of all, I want to thank you, Pat, and thank you, listeners, for joining us on Leaders in the Arena, where we explore the stories and insights that shape today's leaders. At Bridge Innovate, we're dedicated to helping leaders like you tackle tough challenges and drive meaningful change. And if you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and don't miss future discussions. And feel free to share this episode with others. We look forward to having you back on the next episode, and you can connect with a member of our team, by reaching out to us at our email address. So anyway, thanks everyone. Good to be with you today. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, John.